Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about how to coach learner drivers from the very first driving lesson, and indeed how to set up a coaching approach from before that first driving lesson. So often when I meet driving instructors who are interested in coaching and who want to develop as coaches, they bemoan the fact that it can be quite difficult to coach learner drivers on the first couple of driving lessons for a couple of reasons. But some of the reasons I hear are that they don't know anything. Learner drivers don't have enough knowledge at that moment in time, that they just have to learn the basics before they can start getting into a client-centered relationship. Or it can even be just that learner drivers don't have any sense of what is supposed to happen on driving lessons, so they are very reliant on the driving instructors in these early stages. Now, while these are all valid points and I completely accept them, it used to happen to me all the time when I was working full-time as a driving instructor. The point of today's video is to show you that it doesn't have to be that way, and that it's actually very important that we do something to counteract these factors, and it's very easily done, and we're going to talk about that in today's video. And before we go any further, we do have another video on some coaching models and techniques for driving instructors, and we'll pop that at the end of this video, so please hang around till the end if you haven't seen that one yet. So first of all, why does it matter? Why is it important that we start coaching learner drivers from day one of the process? So there are a few reasons. I would say the first reason is to make sure that they enjoy the lesson though. If your learner is able to be involved in the learning process prior to the lesson beginning, and certainly on that first driving lesson, they're going to have a far more enjoyable experience than if they turn up and they've just been told what to do and talked through a controls lesson for the best part of 45 minutes. If we're able to set up a scenario where our learner driver is involved in the learning process from the very start, we're building responsibility from day one. And what that means is your pupil, your client, is involved in a process where they are not working towards pleasing you as a driving instructor, they're working towards their own goals, and we will demonstrate how to do that. Building responsibility in learner drivers is crucial. The learning to drive process historically has been one where the driving instructor has led their pupils through a journey of knowledge and understanding and skill development. And what we are learning that this leads to is that by the time the pupils pass the driving test, they are not responsible for their own decision making. Building responsibility in our learner drivers from day one is a crucial aspect towards developing safe and thoughtful drivers who are capable of making decisions on their own after they pass the driving test. By coaching learner drivers, we're building resilience, we're building people who are capable of self-reflection and self-assessment, and who are more inclined to continuously improve after the driving test. And finally, as we've mentioned elsewhere, it's only through coaching that we can reach the third column of the goals for driver education. If you don't know what the goals for driver education are, I'll leave a link in the comments section below, and you should definitely take a look at that if you're training to be a driving instructor, if you're thinking about becoming a driving instructor, or if you're a driving instructor already and you haven't heard of the GDE, please do check that out. If you're a driving instructor and you decide to tell your pupils what to do for the first 2 or 3 lessons, then you'll find it very difficult to transfer to a coaching approach after that. You'll be asking your pupil what they want to do today, and your pupils will say that they do not know because they're not been used to having that control over the decision-making process. So it is important that we coach our learner drivers from as early as possible in the process. How do we do that? Arranging to have a conversation with a new client before the first driving lesson is a fantastic opportunity to get to know your client, put them at ease, and encourage them to start taking responsibility. It's also an excellent opportunity to introduce them to some coaching concepts without necessarily getting into the whole how and why of coaching. You'll be asking some basic things in this first telephone call to your client, such as their availability, such as any previous experience. But that first telephone call also gives you the opportunity to address their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs about driving lessons. It's very tempting to think that every new learner that gets into your car is a complete blank piece of paper, but that is not true. One of the principles of coaching is that everyone comes into a coaching relationship with their own life experience, with their own biases, with their own thoughts and feelings about whatever it is they're about to do. And this phone call before the first driving lesson is your opportunity to try and have a conversation about these things with your new client. So let's say, for example, you're having a conversation with a new client about driving, and you ask them, how they're feeling ahead of the first driving lesson. And your learner driver might say, yeah, I'm feeling okay. Not overly enthused, but not really, really nervous, but just okay. You could begin a coaching relationship at this point by saying, so what does okay mean? That could open up a conversation around the fact that perhaps their best friend is learning to drive at the moment and they're not particularly enjoying the experience, which is leading them to think that it's not going to be enjoyable for them. So just by asking these questions about thoughts and feelings, coaching style questions, you've already got some data on how that person is feeling about the process of learning to drive. Alternatively, your pupil may share with you that they're feeling a little bit nervous, a little bit scared about their first driving lesson, and that's something that you could choose to explore as well. And you may find out that they've been involved in a car crash on a previous car journey with someone. Again, this is important data that you can use to build a profile of your client. The second way of bringing coaching into the phone call that happens before the driving lesson is to ask them if they have a goal for the first driving lesson. You can phrase this in one of several different ways, but a common way to pitch this would be to ask, what do you want to achieve from your first driving lesson, or what has to happen on your first driving lesson for you to feel that it's been a success? Now, what this does is it encourages your pupil to actually visualize themselves being in the car, having a driving lesson with you, and visualizing the end of that driving lesson. Now, hopefully, we want our clients to have a good driving lesson. We want them to have a bit of fun, but we also want them to feel that they've achieved something during that lesson as well. And by asking your client what that is, you're being really client-centered and you're allowing them to take the lead on that process. Now, if your pupil doesn't give you much information back when you start asking about these kind of things, that's okay. Once they get into the car on the first driving lesson, we're going to come back to the goal anyway. So it could be something that you encourage your pupil to think about between the phone call and the first driving lesson. So you could be saying something like, between now and then, what I'd like you to do is just have a think about what you want to achieve on the first driving lesson. How do you want to feel by the end of the 1 hour session? The third thing you could do on the telephone call is encourage your pupil to do a little bit of research around the learning to drive process. In particular, what are they going to need to know for that first driving lesson? By encouraging people to take responsibility for some work ahead of the day, you are immediately placing them at the centre of the learning process. You are encouraging them to come to an understanding that their success on that first driving lesson, to some extent, will rely on how much research they do between now and then. So there's absolutely nothing stopping a brand new learner driver picking up a copy of Driving the Essential Skills or the Highway Code. There's absolutely nothing to stop them jumping onto YouTube and doing a little bit of research around what happens on a first driving lesson. And there's nothing to stop them speaking to friends who are possibly learning to drive at the same time as them. Any research they do will be valuable. They will learn something that they didn't know already. Hopefully it will put them at ease a little bit as well if there are more good stories than bad. And they will come to your driving lesson feeling motivated, feeling involved, and it'll also save you a lot of work because you'll have less things to cover, hopefully, than you would otherwise. The fourth thing you could choose to do prior to the first driving lesson is to send some kind of contracting agreement. Now, we're not going to go into contracting in too much detail in this video, but if you'd like to know more about that, leave a comment in the section below and I'll do a video on contracting. A contracting agreement is different to terms and conditions. Terms and conditions are about payments, they're about no-shows, they're about bank details, they're about turning up on time for lessons, etc. A contracting agreement is about who is going to be responsible for what in the learning process. It's an opportunity for you to explain to your learner driver how learning is going to take place, and it's an opportunity for you to place out your responsibilities as a trainer and also demonstrate what your expectations are from your clients in that process. So we have had a conversation with our new client. And in that conversation, we have discussed their previous experience of driving. We have discussed their thoughts and their feelings around the driving process and their thoughts and feelings in particular around the first driving lesson. We've hopefully encouraged them to do a little bit of research and come to the first driving lesson with a little bit more knowledge than they had before. And we have also potentially sent them a contracting agreement which will lay out some expectations for both parties. Now it's time to pick them up and take them to a quiet area so that they can have their first driving lesson. There was a time before coaching and client-centered learning came into the world of driving instruction where you would sit in the car with your pupil and talk at them for half an hour about the cockpit drill. Now, hopefully those days are gone. It is absolutely possible to have a conversation with your learner driver, a client-centered conversation, where you uncover previous knowledge about what controls in the car they know about, what controls they don't know about, make it an enjoyable process, make it an interactive process, and make your pupil feel like they are actively engaging with you in the learning process. It's not a passive process, it's an active process. And we do that not by following a script of all the controls that we have in the car. We do it by just asking them what they know. What have they managed to find out about the controls between the telephone conversation you've had with them and today? So a good place to start might be the pedals. Just ask them what they know. You will also want to ask them about their seat position and can they reach the pedals. You will want to ask them about the gear stick if you're driving a manual car. You will want to ask them about the hand controls that surround the steering wheel. And all of these questions, your pupil is going to give correct answers to some of them, incorrect answers to others, and in some instances they will not know. And that is absolutely fine. The benefit of just asking them and allowing them to get some things right outweighs the fact that they are going to get some things wrong, and you're obviously going to fill in the blanks and rearrange the order in some of these things. It's also worth bearing in mind that we do not need to cover all of the controls on the first driving lesson. If it's 30 degrees in the middle of July, we do not necessarily need to cover the windscreen wipers unless the forecast tells you that it is going to rain. Do we need to talk about cruise control on the first driving lesson? Do we need to talk about speed limiters on the first driving lesson? Probably not. Unless your pupil is a car geek or a trainee mechanic, try not to get bogged down in too much of the detail. Focus on delivering an enjoyable lesson, one in which they are at the centre of the learning. Once you've had a client-led conversation about the controls of the car, you can then develop that into whatever research they've been able to do in between the telephone call and this lesson. So you'll be able to ask them if they have been able to figure out what they will have to do to move the car. You'll be able to ask them if they've learned anything about safety, mirror checks, where do they have to be checking? And we do all this through asking questions. Now, the responses you get may not be perfect. They do not have to be. We are going to be responsible for safety in this driving lesson. The pupil does not have to get things 100% right all of the time. One of the principles of coaching is a belief that people have the ability to solve problems and figure things out for themselves. And this is the reason that we're asking all these questions. At some point on your first driving lesson, you're going to want to return to the goal that we talked about during the telephone conversation. So remember, how does that pupil want to feel by the end of today's session? What would they like to achieve? And it's really good practice to remember that moving off and stopping is a topic, and the goal is how the person wants to feel about that topic. In this case, they want to enjoy it. They want to be able to move the car from A to B a couple of times, maybe turn a corner and not stall. These are normal goals that we hear when we're talking about how people want to feel and what they want to achieve on a first driving lesson. And once you've figured out the controls with your learner driver, once you've had a chat, a client-centered conversation around what they have to do to move the car, you're going to chat about what level of support they need from you to make that happen. You're going to go and do your lesson. And finally, at the end of the lesson, we're going to do some reflection. Now, reflective practice is covered elsewhere on this channel, but a very, very brief kind of recap of reflection is what went well for that client on today's driving lesson. What did they enjoy? What happened that was good that they maybe weren't expecting to happen? How did they feel about it? Always focus on the positives first. The second part of a reflection is what didn't go so well today? What did your pupil struggle with? What did they need to go and do a little bit more research on? Did anything frustrate them? And from these two questions, these two sets of questions, we should be encouraging our pupil to come up with a goal for the next driving lesson. If you use this coaching approach and these coaching techniques on the first driving lesson, you will be delivering client-centered learning from day one. You'll be putting your pupil at the centre of the learning process. You'll be building engagement from a very early stage, and you'll be ensuring that your pupil feels like they are contributing to every single part of the journey. And this is going to be incredibly important as your pupil works through the learning process. We don't want pupils to be in a situation where they are learning to drive and they're mastering skills to please the driving instructor. We want our pupils to achieve things and perform well and master skills to achieve their own goals that they've set for themselves. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you found it useful, and I'll see you on the next video.